Hey guys, so it's time for another monthly meta-analysis where I go through the publicly available replays of the top 25 ranked players on Dueling Book and outline what decks they were playing and their win percentages. Now the matches included in this video were all post-July 2021 ban list, and if you want to see monthly breakdowns like these, then make sure to subscribe. So let's just get started. So this was the breakdown of the decks involved for this month's meta-analysis. So as a friendly reminder, this pie chart is based on 493 matches, and so it's roughly 20 replays contributed by each player. It's not exactly 500 replays because there are some matches where it ended before any card was played, so I excluded that. So starting off, we have Tri-Brigade that just takes the cake and was the most played deck. Now this includes Tri-Brigade Luralisk as well, although I only saw a very small amount of that. The rest seem to be your typical Tri-Brigade list that we've become accustomed to, although without Trident. Then surprisingly, we have Virtual World as the second most played deck, followed by Prank Kids, so two decks that we really should not be sleeping on still. Next, we had a tie between Sky Striker and Salamangreat, and at least for Strikers, I really thought that it would at least be the second most played deck among the top players, especially so fresh off the new ban list where a lot of players would presumably want to try out the Engage hype. Then we have some other familiar decks like Dogmatica, Invoke Shaddoll, and Drytron, which both, especially Drytron, are arguably tier 1 decks, so it's surprising to see them have less representation this month. And then you even have Endymion Pendulums make it to my meta-analysis for the first time, and at Ignister, ABC, Meg Knights, and Infernoble Knights were also there at the same frequency. Now compare this to my last month's meta-analysis where I actually did it on the top 50 players just because I wanted to ensure that I only included matches post Lightning Overdrive, so I needed to include more players. At this point, Dragon Link was of course the most played and the best deck, although this month it was pretty much absent. Drytron and at Ignister saw a ton of play last month as well since they did get their buff from Lightning Overdrive, and Tri-Brigade Zodiac and Pure Zodiac were seeing a lot of play as well. We did see some dinos back then, but this time we didn't see any among our top 25 players, although it is still a good deck despite Misk being put to 1. As for the overall breakdown, it's a given at this point that our top 25 players typically win about 75% of their matches. As for the playstyle, we have a lot of control decks being played by our top players this time at 50%, and usually combo decks are played more by our top players by far. Now keep in mind though, I did categorize Virtual World as combo for this graph, and I know that can get a little murky because that deck has both combo and control aspects to it, and you could argue that perhaps the deck has gone more of a control route since the VFD ban, so it's not perfect, and I'd like to hear from you on how this deck should be categorized. So now let's cover the top 5 most played decks in a bit more detail. Starting with Tri-Brigade, the deck is just really strong despite the Trident ban, winning about 80% of the matches when piloted by our top players. With the release of Bearbrum, it can search for Revolt now, and along with a Palooza and some strong traps like Imperial or Anti-Spell, the deck is very resilient. The match win percentage based on whether they won or lost the die roll really didn't matter either, winning roughly 80% of the matches in either instance. In terms of the deck's performance among all players on Dueling Book, since the new ban list, it was the third most played deck, and I added the Tri-Brigade and Tri-Brigade Zodiac categories on YGO for this. The win percentage among all players was an impressive 61% as well, one of the highest on there. Next up we have Virtual World, which is quite slept on and is a strong deck despite not having VFD anymore. Shen Shen on its own with its Macrocosmo effect is strong, and Chooch serving as a recyclable pop is powerful as well. On top of that, they typically bring out Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon as well, and other hand traps or regular traps to go along with it. Our top players piloting the deck won about 76% of their matches, and as expected, had a higher win percentage for the match if they won the die roll at 84% compared to the 68% if they lost the die roll. As for the overall deck performance among all players on Dueling Book, it was the 4th most played deck since the new ban list, so popular among everyone and not just the top players. It won an impressive 62% among all players as well. At third we have Prank Kids, and let's not sleep on this deck since it was considered a tier 1 deck a real short time ago, and as expected, was not hit on the ban list in any fashion. The deck won 79% of the matches among our top players, and had better performance if the top players won the die roll at 86%, versus the 72% win rate when they lost the die roll. The win percentages, even when they lost the die roll, is pretty impressive, and the deck can play a lot of hand traps, so having to go second is not the worst of things for this deck. Among all players, it is still quite popular, being the 5th most played deck since the new ban list, and also, again, winning a respectable 61% of the matches. Next up, we have a fan favorite deck in Sky Striker, and whether you like it or not, Ray is back. The deck won 77% among our top players, and I'm going to look into doing an analytical video specific to Sky Striker soon, so stay tuned for that. As for win percentage by die roll, it doesn't matter to Sky Strikers really since they are a going second deck. In fact, you see the win percentages being pretty weird in that they won 70% of the matches when they won the die roll, compared to 86% when they lost the die roll. Of course, we are dealing with small sample sizes as always, so don't forget about that. Now, while we did not see our top players piloting Striker as much as I thought they would, among all players on Dueling Book, we do see that it is in fact the most played deck. At the same time, the win percentage among all players was somewhat miserable at 49%, although you are going to have a lot of bad players piloting this deck as well, that will bring the win percentages down. Now, Disencoder actually messaged me not too long ago and suggested to me that it would be interesting to see the win percentages for decks like Striker and Salamangreat just before the ban list and after the ban list. So if we were to look at the last 7 days before the July ban list came into effect, Sky Strikers definitely were not played that much, coming at 17th. The win percentage was a bit lower at 42% as well among all players, so we'll see if this gap widens or lessens over time as players get used to having Engage back. Lastly, we have Salamangreat, which finally got Mirage Stalio back. Back in its prime, it was a tier 1 deck topping events left and right, but now in this format, I'm not quite sure if it will be the powerhouse it once was. The deck won 68% among our top players, so this is the lowest among the top 5 decks that I'm covering, although we are dealing with small sample sizes of course. As for its win percentage, whether it won or lost a die roll, it was pretty equal at around 67 to 68%. I don't think this is too surprising since the deck is very grindy with a lot of hand traps and can certainly do well whether it goes first or second, although it certainly does prefer to go first. As for the deck performance among all players, it is definitely very popular at second place in terms of number of matches played. Win percentage wise was around 52%, so not terrible, but not great. Again, as Coder suggested, if we look at the performance in the last 7 days before the ban list took effect, then we see that Salamangreat was still one of the most played decks regardless of the Stalio return, and funnily enough, the deck actually did slightly better at 55% in the last format. Of course, this does not necessarily mean that the deck does worse with Stalio back or anything. These win percentages are affected by many things outside of the deck itself, like the players piloting the deck, the best decks of the current format, and the like. Let's see how this deck does at the YCS though. Alright guys, so that was it for this month's meta-analysis. Hope you found that helpful before you go into the Remote Duel YCS or any other tournament that you'll be participating soon. If you want to follow my monthly meta and rogue analysis, then make sure to subscribe, and sharing the video would really help a small channel like mine as well. Take care guys.